Welcome to Spooky Stories. I'm Milo, your guide through the chilling and the unknown. Here, we dive into terrifying tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Join our community of thrill seekers, and let's explore the darkness together. Are you ready to be scared? 1. It all started during the quarantine. With the world on lockdown, I was confined to my small, cozy house in the suburbs. It was an old Victorian, full of charm and history, but it had always been just that, history. I never expected that the past could creep into the present in such a chilling way. The first sign was subtle. I noticed little things out of place. My keys weren't where I had left them. A chair slightly moved from the dining table. A book left open on a page I hadn't read yet. Initially, I chalked it up to my own absent-mindedness. After all, with the stress of the pandemic, it was easy to overlook the small details. But then the noises started. At first, it was just the occasional creak or thump, which I dismissed as the house settling or the wind playing tricks. Yet the sounds grew more frequent and distinct. Late at night, as I lay in bed, I would hear soft footsteps above me. They seemed to pace back and forth, stopping abruptly as if whoever or whatever was up there had sensed my unease. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. Armed with a flashlight and a kitchen knife for good measure, I decided to investigate. I climbed the narrow, creaky staircase to the attic, my heart pounding in my chest. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old wood. I shone the flashlight around, half expecting to find nothing but old boxes and forgotten memories. Instead, I found a makeshift bed, a pile of blankets and a pillow. There were food wrappers and empty water bottles scattered around. Someone had been living in my attic. My mind raced. How long had this intruder been here? How had I not noticed sooner? The thought of someone sneaking around my home while I slept was terrifying. I backed out of the attic, trying to stay calm. I locked myself in my bedroom and called the police, my hands trembling as I dialed. The police arrived quickly and swept the house, but the intruder was nowhere to be found. They told me it was likely a transient who had taken advantage of the quarantine to find shelter. They assured me they would patrol the area more frequently, but the encounter left me shaken. I changed the locks and installed security cameras, hoping to regain a sense of safety. For a while, things were quiet. I began to relax, thinking the worst was over. But then, strange things started happening again. The cameras would catch brief glimpses of movement, but nothing clear enough to identify. I would wake up to find doors open that I had closed, lights on that I had turned off. My sense of dread grew with each passing day. One particularly stormy night, the power went out. I was plunged into darkness, the house eerily silent except for the sound of the rain pounding against the windows. I fumbled for my flashlight and made my way to the breaker box in the basement. As I descended the stairs, I heard a soft whisper, like someone calling my name. Sarah. I froze, my blood running cold. I hadn't imagined it. Someone was in the house with me. I turned around slowly, shining the flashlight into the shadows. There was nothing there. I hurried to the breaker box, flipping the switches desperately until the lights flickered back on. When I turned around, I saw him. A gaunt man with hollow eyes and matted hair stood at the bottom of the stairs. His clothes were dirty and torn, his face twisted into a menacing grin. I screamed and backed away, but he advanced slowly, almost leisurely. "Get out of my house!" I yelled, my voice shaking. He tilted his head, as if considering my words. "Your house," he said softly. "I've been here longer than you think." I didn't wait to hear more. I bolted up the stairs and slammed the door behind me, locking it and pushing a heavy dresser against it. I grabbed my phone and called the police again, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The minutes felt like hours as I waited for the police to arrive. I could hear him moving around downstairs, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. He was taunting me, letting me know that I was no longer safe in my own home. When the police finally arrived, they found him hiding in a crawl space behind the attic. He had created a small, hidden door that led directly into the attic, a space I had never even known existed. They took him away, but the damage was done. My sense of security was shattered. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak, every rustle of leaves outside sent my heart racing. I started to see a therapist, hoping to reclaim some peace of mind. Slowly, I began to piece my life back together, but the fear never fully left me. Then, one day, I received a letter. It was from the man who had been living in my attic. He was in a psychiatric hospital, undergoing treatment. He apologized for what he had done, explaining that he had lost his home and job during the pandemic and had nowhere else to go. He had chosen my house because it looked welcoming, and he had never intended to harm me. His letter was filled with remorse, but it offered little comfort. The thought of him watching me, knowing my routines, living above me as I went about my daily life, it was too much to bear. I decided to sell the house and move away, hoping to leave the nightmare behind. But even now, in my new home, I can't help but check the attic every night before I go to bed. The fear lingers, a constant reminder of the time when my sanctuary was violated, and I was forced to confront the dark presence lurking just above me. 2. The first time I heard the whispers, I thought it was just my imagination. Living alone in an apartment building in the city, it wasn't uncommon to hear noises. But this was different. The sound was coming from the apartment next door, an apartment I knew was empty. I had seen the previous tenants move out weeks ago, and the landlord hadn't rented it out yet. It was late at night, and the city was unusually quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel isolated, amplifying every creak and groan of the building. I was sitting on my couch, reading a book, when I heard it, a faint, almost inaudible whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it was clear enough to make me put down my book and listen. At first, I tried to ignore it. I turned up the volume on the TV, hoping the sound would drown out whatever was coming from the other side of the wall. But the whispers persisted, growing louder and more insistent. Curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself pressing my ear against the wall, straining to hear. "Come closer," the voice seemed to say. It was so soft, so inviting, that it sent a chill down my spine. I pulled away, feeling a strange mix of fear and intrigue. Who could it be? Why were they whispering in an empty apartment? Days turned into weeks, and the whispers continued. They would start late at night, always when I was alone, always when the building was silent. I asked the landlord if anyone had moved in next door, but he assured me the apartment was still vacant. He looked at me like I was crazy when I mentioned the whispers, so I decided to keep my experiences to myself. One night, the whispers took on a new and terrifying dimension. As I lay in bed, trying to sleep, I heard my name. "John." The voice was soft, almost pleading. I sat up, heart pounding. "John, come here." It was unmistakable now. Someone or something was calling my name. I got out of bed, my legs trembling, and walked to the door. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. The whispering continued, now louder and more urgent. I took a deep breath and opened the door, stepping into the dimly lit hallway. The apartment next door loomed ahead, its door slightly ajar. The whispers were louder now, more insistent. I walked slowly, my footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. As I reached the door, I pushed it open and stepped inside. The apartment was dark, the air thick with an oppressive silence. I took a few steps forward, my heart racing. Then I saw him. A frail, elderly man standing in the middle of the room, his eyes wide with fear. He was clutching his chest, struggling to breathe. "Help me," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I rushed forward, trying to help, but before I could reach him, he collapsed, falling to the floor with a thud. I knelt beside him, my hands shaking as I called for an ambulance. The paramedics arrived quickly, but it was too late. The old man was gone. They asked me questions, trying to piece together what had happened, but I had no answers. I didn't know who he was or how he had gotten into the apartment. All I knew was that he had called out to me, and now he was dead. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, twisted in pain and fear. The whispers were gone, replaced by a suffocating silence. I felt a deep sense of unease, as if something terrible was about to happen. In the days that followed, the nightmares began. Every night, I would see the old man standing at the foot of my bed, his eyes wide and pleading. He would reach out to me, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Help me, John." I tried to shake off the nightmares, telling myself they were just a product of my imagination. But they persisted, growing more vivid and terrifying with each passing night. I started to dread going to bed, knowing that the old man would be waiting for me in my dreams. One night, I woke up to find him standing beside my bed, his hand on my shoulder. His touch was cold, sending a shiver down my spine. "John, you have to help me," he whispered. "I can't find peace." I bolted upright, my heart pounding. The room was empty, but the fear lingered. I knew I couldn't go on like this. I had to find out who the old man was and why he was haunting me. I started my search at the landlord's office, asking about the history of the apartment. He seemed reluctant to talk, but eventually, he told me about the previous tenant, a reclusive elderly man named Mr. Thompson who had lived there for decades. He had no family, no friends, and had passed away quietly in his sleep, or so the landlord thought. I decided to dig deeper, visiting the local library and searching through old records and newspapers. I found an obituary for Mr. Thompson, but it was sparse on details. I started talking to the neighbors, hoping someone could tell me more. One neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Jenkins, remembered Mr. Thompson well. She told me he was a kind but lonely man who had become increasingly frail in his final years. He had confided in her that he was afraid of dying alone, that he felt something was waiting for him on the other side. He was convinced his apartment was haunted, Mrs. Jenkins said, her voice trembling. He would hear whispers at night just like you described. He believed they were spirits trying to take him away. Her words sent a chill down my spine. Could it be that Mr. Thompson's fear of dying alone had trapped his spirit in the apartment? Was he now one of the whispers that haunted the building? I knew I had to do something to help him find peace. I consulted a local priest, explaining my situation. He agreed to perform a blessing in the apartment, hoping it would help Mr. Thompson's spirit move on. We stood in the empty apartment, the air heavy with an unseen presence. The priest recited prayers, sprinkling holy water in every corner. As he finished, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. The nightmares were gone, and the whispers had ceased. I hoped that Mr. Thompson had finally found the peace he had been seeking, but my relief was short-lived. A few nights later, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever. John, help me." I sat up in bed, my heart racing. The old man was back, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. I knew I couldn't ignore him. I had to find a way to help him move on. I returned to the library, poring over old records and talking to anyone who might have known Mr. Thompson. I learned that he had once been a devoted husband, but his wife had died tragically in a car accident many years ago. He had never recovered from the loss, and it had haunted him until his death. I realized then that Mr. Thompson's spirit was trapped by his unresolved grief. He couldn't find peace because he was still mourning his wife. I decided to visit her grave, hoping that somehow it might help. The cemetery was quiet, a stark contrast to the turmoil I felt inside. I found her grave, a simple headstone with her name and dates. I stood there for a long time, feeling a deep sense of sadness. I spoke aloud, telling her about her husband's plight and my desire to help him find peace. As I spoke, I felt a strange warmth envelop me, as if a presence was listening. I hoped it was Mrs. Thompson hearing my plea. I asked her to come for him, to take him to the peace he so desperately needed. That night, the whispers were softer, more distant. "Thank you, John." I woke up with tears in my eyes, feeling a profound sense of relief. The nightmares were gone, and I knew in my heart that Mr. Thompson had finally found his way to his beloved wife. Life slowly returned to normal, but I was forever changed by the experience. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been touched by something beyond this world, something that defied explanation. I moved away from the apartment building, seeking a fresh start. But even now, in my new home, I sometimes hear a faint whisper in the dead of night. It's not frightening anymore. Instead, it's a reminder of the man who sought my help from beyond the grave and the strange, unexplainable bond we shared. 3. The first time I felt it, I thought it was just a dream, a cold, almost icy touch grazing my skin as I lay in bed, half asleep. It was a sensation so eerie and unsettling that it jolted me awake. But in the darkness of my room, everything seemed normal. I shrugged it off, blaming it on the overactive imagination that often comes with late-night horror movies and too much caffeine. But it kept happening. Night after night, I would feel that same cold touch, a ghostly caress that sent shivers down my spine. I would wake up, heart pounding, only to find nothing out of the ordinary. The room was always just as I had left it, my door securely locked, windows shut tight. Still, the feeling persisted, growing stronger and more frequent. Then the shadows started. At first, they were just fleeting glimpses out of the corner of my eye, a dark shape shifting in the periphery of my vision. But soon they became more pronounced. I would lie in bed, paralyzed with fear, watching as shadowy figures moved across my walls, seemingly alive and intent on tormenting me. The fear was palpable, a suffocating presence that clung to me long after the shadows had faded. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't keep living like this, in constant fear of what might happen each night. Desperation drove me to install cameras in my bedroom, hoping to capture whatever was causing these disturbances. I needed proof, something tangible to confront my growing terror. The first few nights, the cameras showed nothing unusual, just a restless man tossing and turning in her sleep, haunted by her own imagination. But then, on the fourth night, I saw it, a nebulous figure, barely visible, hovering over my bed. It was translucent, almost ethereal, but its presence was undeniable. It lingered over me, its form shifting and pulsating as if trying to seep into my very being. The sight was horrifying, but I couldn't look away. I watched, frozen in fear, as the figure bent down, its face inches from mine. The cold touch returned, more intense than ever, and I could see my own body react on the screen, shivering, recoiling from the invisible contact. I knew I had to call the police. There was no rational explanation for what I was seeing, but I couldn't ignore the evidence. I dialed 911, my hands trembling, and tried to explain the situation. The operator's skepticism was clear, but she promised to send someone over to investigate. When the officers arrived, they reviewed the footage with me, their expressions growing more serious by the second. They didn't dismiss my fears as mere hallucinations or tricks of the light. Instead, they seemed deeply disturbed by what they saw. They took my statement, examined the room, and assured me they would look into it further. Days passed with no word from the police. I tried to go about my life, but the fear lingered. Every night, I would lie awake, waiting for the cold touch, the shifting shadows, the nebulous figure that haunted my sleep. I felt like I was losing my mind, trapped in a waking nightmare with no end in sight. Then, one evening, I received a call. It was the lead investigator on my case, his voice tense and urgent. He told me they had discovered something that defied explanation but confirmed my worst fears. The figure in the footage wasn't a ghost or a figment of my imagination. It was a man, a very real and dangerous man. He had been on the run for months, a notorious sexual predator with a long history of stalking and assaulting young women. Somehow, he had found his way into my home, using some kind of cloaking technology to evade detection. The cold touch I had felt, the shadows on my walls, they were all him, invading my personal space, my sanctuary, with malevolent intent. The police had tracked him down, using the footage from my cameras to identify him and locate his hideout. He had been living in the crawl space above my apartment, sneaking in and out through a hidden access point. They arrested him, but the damage was done. I felt violated, my sense of security shattered. In the days that followed, the media got wind of the story. The headlines were sensational, designed to provoke outrage and fear. Predator in the attic, young woman's horrifying discovery, read one. Technology used in disturbing home invasion, read another. The public was shocked, the story igniting debates about privacy, safety, and the creeping influence of technology in our lives. As I tried to piece my life back together, I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of a shadow, sent me into a panic. I moved out of the apartment, unable to stay in the place where my worst fears had become reality. I sought therapy, hoping to reclaim some sense of normalcy. But the nightmares continued. I would see his face, twisted with malice, feel his cold touch, hear the whispers that had haunted my nights. My therapist assured me that the fear would fade with time, but deep down, I knew I would never truly be free. The experience changed me in ways I couldn't have anticipated. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, always on edge, always looking over my shoulder. I installed security systems in my new home, took self-defense classes, and became an advocate for victims of similar crimes. My story, horrifying as it was, served as a warning to others, a reminder of the hidden dangers that lurk in the shadows. Looking back, I can hardly believe it happened. It feels like a twisted dream, a dark chapter in my life that I struggle to make sense of. But the scars are real, both physical and emotional, and they serve as a constant reminder of the nightmare I endured. To anyone reading this, I urge you to be vigilant. Trust your instincts, protect your personal space, and never ignore the signs that something is wrong. Evil often wears a mask, blending into the mundane until it strikes. But you don't have to face it alone. There is help, there is hope, and there is a way out of the darkness. Meet Sarah. Like many of us, she used to dread bedtime, hours spent tossing and turning, waking up groggy and irritable, and worst of all, her relentless snoring that not only disturbed her sleep, but her partner's as well. Desperate for a solution, Sarah tried everything. New mattresses, white noise machines, even sleeping pills. Nothing worked until she discovered our breathing for sleep routine. One particularly frustrating night, Sarah stumbled upon an article about the power of breathing to improve sleep. Skeptical but willing to try anything, she read about our breathing for sleep routine, a simple, scientifically backed method designed to clear sinuses, enhance breathing, and eliminate oxygen blockades. It promised to guide users through a simple breathing routine for the best sleep of their lives. Intrigued, she decided to give it a shot. As she began the routine, Sarah immediately felt her sinuses clear. She followed the step-by-step guide, learning how to breathe deeply and correctly. Within minutes, she noticed a significant difference. Her breathing was smoother, more relaxed. That night, she fell asleep faster than she had in years and, incredibly, stayed asleep all night. One of the most astonishing benefits was the end of her snoring. The routine included a simple breathing hack that stopped her snoring in minutes. Sarah learned that her habit of mouth breathing was activating her survival mode, preventing her from achieving truly restful sleep. By switching to nasal breathing, she deactivated this mode and allowed her body to fully relax. The next morning, Sarah woke up feeling refreshed and rejuvenated. She couldn't remember the last time she felt so well rested. Her partner noticed the difference too. No more middle-of-the-night disruptions from her snoring. The transformation was remarkable, and Sarah knew she had found something special. Sarah's story is not unique. Many others have discovered the life-changing benefits of our breathing for sleep routine. Imagine falling asleep quickly, sleeping soundly through the night, and waking up feeling fully rested. No more snoring, no more grogginess, just deep, restorative sleep. Are you ready to transform your sleep like Sarah did? Our breathing for sleep routine is easy to follow and starts working immediately. Clear your sinuses, enhance your breathing, and remove oxygen blockades with our guided routine. Say goodbye to snoring and hello to the best sleep of your life. Don't spend another night tossing and turning. Experience the power of proper breathing and reclaim your nights. Try our breathing for sleep routine tonight and wake up to a new, refreshed you. Because everyone deserves the gift of deep, restful sleep. Check out the link for this wonder in the description and the comments. Thank you for joining us on this harrowing journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of terror. Until next time, stay safe and beware the shadows.